I had just buried my husband overseas. The earth on his grave was still damp when I typed into the family group chat, "Flight lands at 5 p.m. Can someone pick me up?" My brother replied in seconds. "We're busy. Try Uber," my mother added. "Why didn't you plan better?" I stared at the screen. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't rise. I simply wrote back 2 words. "No worries." What they saw on the evening news hours later made their faces turn pale. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The glow from my phone screen reflected in the airplane window. Outside, the world looked blurred, as if even the clouds had been crying with me. I traced the condensation with my finger, half expecting his hand to cover mine like he always did on long flights. But the seat beside me was empty, just a folded flag resting quietly in my carry-on. That was all I brought back from him. The pilot's voice broke through the cabin. "We'll be landing in Nashville in 20 minutes. Passengers around me shifted, collecting bags, whispering plans, dinners, waiting kids at soccer practice, someone picking them up at the gate. I sat still, my hands folded on my lap, rehearsing what it would feel like to walk out of that airport alone. I thought of my brother Jason. He was always the loud one at the dinner table, the kind who bragged about promotions and vacations in Cabo. When we were kids, I had once broken my arm falling from a tree, and Jason had sprinted to call Mom, his face pale with worry. I still remember the way he had held my hand in the ambulance, whispering, "I'm here." How easily time rewrites people. Now the same brother dismissed me with 3 words, "Try Uber." My mother Linda had a way of folding criticism into every conversation. She once told me on my wedding day that my dress looked too plain, almost rushed. I had smiled through it then because I thought that's what daughters did: smile, absorb, carry on. Reading her reply on the group chat, "Why didn't you plan better?" felt less like new pain and more like an echo of old wounds. The plane touched down with a jolt. My heart thudded in rhythm with the wheels screeching against the runway. Around me, seatbelts clicked open and laughter filled the aisles. A child ran to hug his father, who was waiting by the gate, squealing with joy. I walked past them, dragging my suitcase. No arms reached out for me. No one called my name. Outside the terminal, the air was thick with exhaust and chatter. People waved signs, lifted bouquets, and cried into shoulders. I stood still. My phone buzzed again, this time not from family but from an unknown number. A text. "This is Sergeant Miller. Just checking if you landed safely. We'll talk soon." I breathed in. That message felt more like family than anything in the group chat. I called for an Uber just like Jason suggested. The driver, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked at me through the rearview mirror. "Rough day," she asked softly. I wanted to tell her everything. That my husband Daniel had collapsed halfway across the world, his heart betraying him in a dusty base camp. That the military folded his life into a flag and handed it to me with hands that trembled less than mine. That my family, the ones who should have been my anchor, treated me like excess luggage. But all I said was, "Yeah, rough day." She didn't press. Sometimes strangers know better than family when silence is sacred. As the car pulled away from the airport, I watched the city blur into twilight. Neon signs blinked alive. Restaurants filled with laughter. I pressed my forehead against the glass, remembering the nights Daniel and I had driven these same streets looking for late-night diners after his shifts. He had always insisted on sitting on the side facing the street, saying he liked to see the world rushing by. "It reminds me we're still moving," he once told me, his hand warm over mine. Now the city lights rushed by without him, and I felt myself standing still in a crowd that didn't even notice I was frozen. The hotel room smelled of new carpet and stale air conditioning. I dropped my bag and sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling back through the group chat. Jason's words glared at me. Mom's jab nestled just below it. I stared at my reply. "No worries." 2 words. So simple, yet carrying a weight they'd never understand. I thought about replying again, something sharp, something to pierce their indifference. But then my phone buzzed with a news alert. Headline: Local widow returns home after overseas military burial. My breath caught. The photo was of me at the airport walking alone, suitcase trailing behind. I hadn't noticed the cameras. The caption read, "Community questions. Where was her family?" For a moment I froze. My pulse quickened, then slowed again. A wave is pacing through me. This wasn't my plan. I hadn't asked for this spotlight. Yet here it was, truth broadcasting louder than I ever could. I set the phone down. In the silence, the hum of the air conditioner filled the room. Daniel's voice drifted back from memory. "You don't have to fight loud. Sometimes the quiet wins for you." I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The world outside kept moving, cars honking, people dining, but I felt a shift deep inside me. Something small, like a seed breaking open under the soil. Hours later, my phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't Sergeant Miller. It was Jason. "Saw the news. Why didn't you tell us reporters were there?" I stared at the message, lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. Then another came, this one from Mom. "You should have warned us. People are asking questions." My chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. They weren't asking if I was okay. They weren't apologizing. They were worried about appearances. I typed, then deleted. Typed again. Finally, I settled on silence. I turned the phone face down, letting it buzz unanswered. The power of not replying, of letting them stew in their unease. Outside, thunder rumbled low, as if the sky itself agreed storms were coming. By midnight, I sat at the hotel desk writing in Daniel's old leather journal. My pen scratched across the page, day one back home. Buried him, carried him, came back alone. Family absent. News present. Their silence hurt more than the grave, but maybe the world will see what they refuse to. I closed the book, gently resting my hand on the cover like it was his chest. The television flickered on in the corner. The evening anchor's voice carried through the empty room. "Questions arise tonight after a young widow returned home from her husband's military burial overseas. Seen alone at the airport." The screen showed me again, dragging my suitcase, head high, eyes forward. Alone, but not small. I watched as the anchor continued, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was looking at my face on the screen, a face lined with quiet strength I hadn't realized I wore. For the first time that day, I felt Daniel close. Not beside me, but within me. A reminder I wasn't invisible, not anymore. The next morning would bring calls, excuses, and desperate attempts to control the story. But for now, in this quiet hotel room with rain tapping against the window and the city humming outside, I let the silence stretch. Because silence, I realized, wasn't empty. It was full of memory, of truth, of power. And that was just the beginning. The rain was still falling against the hotel window when I woke the next morning. A dull gray light filtered through the curtains, casting the room in a kind of muted honesty. I reached for the nightstand where Daniel's old leather journal rested, and as my fingers brushed over its worn cover, another memory surfaced. Not of him this time, of my family. The truth is, their cold replies on the group chat didn't shock me. They only confirmed something I had known for years. I had always been an afterthought in that house. When I was 8, I remember standing in the kitchen on my birthday. Mom had baked a cake, but not for me. It was for Jason, whose birthday had been 2 weeks earlier. "We didn't have time to celebrate then," she said, sliding the chocolate cake onto the table. Jason's name was written across the frosting in thick blue letters. "Can Emily blow out the candles too?" my grandmother had asked gently. Mom frowned. "It's Jason's cake. She can have a slice, but birthdays are special. We don't mix them." I still remember the way Jason grinned, eyes glittering in the candlelight while I sat with my hands folded in my lap. That was the first time I learned to clap for someone else's spotlight, even when I was standing in the shadows. Years later, when college acceptance letters arrived, the same pattern repeated. Jason got into a state university, and the whole family gathered to toast him with sparkling cider. Dad gave a speech, Mom cried, neighbors dropped by with congratulations. When my letter came, an acceptance to the same university, they shrugged. "You'll probably just get married anyway," Mom said. "No sense wasting too much money." I nodded like it didn't sting. But inside I knew something was splintering. Sitting in that hotel room now staring at the rain, I realized how carefully those splinters had been hidden over the years. I had wrapped them in silence, pretending they didn't cut. But silence doesn't heal, it only buries. My phone buzzed on the table, pulling me back to the present. Another message from Jason. Reporters are calling me. What did you say to them? I stared at the words, my reflection faint in the screen. For a moment I saw my 8-year-old self in the glow sitting at that table without candles. I didn't answer. The silence gave space for another memory. Senior year of high school, I won an essay contest. The prize was small, a check for $500, and a feature in the local paper, but it meant the world to me. I remember running into the living room with the letter in my hand. Look, Mom, I said, breathless. I won. She looked up from folding laundry. That's nice, honey. Did Jason tell you he scored a goal last night? Jason beamed. The conversation shifted instantly. My prize, my words evaporated into the air like steam. That night I clipped the article and taped it to my bedroom wall. Alone I read it under the faint light of my desk lamp, whispering the sentences as if to remind myself they were real. In the hotel I reached for Daniel's journal again, opening to a blank page. My pen hovered. Why do I keep writing about them? I murmured to the empty room. Why do their words still bruise me? As if in reply, another voice rose in memory. Daniel's steady and warm. Because scars don't vanish just because you stop looking. They stay until you choose what to do with them. I closed my eyes. His absence pressed down like another silence, heavy but full of meaning. By noon the rain had cleared. Sunlight spilled across the city, dazzling on wet pavement. I decided to walk. The streets were alive with traffic horns and footsteps mixing in chaotic rhythm. Yet I walked as if the world had slowed, each sound muffled by the weight of my thoughts. As I crossed a cafe, laughter spilled through the open door. For a split second, it transported me back to childhood Sunday dinners. Jason at one end of the table telling stories, Mom doting on him, Dad nodding with pride. I was there too, of course, but more like background noise. The twist. Back then, I thought that was normal. I thought all families worked that way, someone chosen, someone overlooked. It wasn't until Daniel came into my life that I realized being seen was possible. Flashback again. The first time Daniel met my family, he shook my father's hand and said, "You should be proud. Emily's brilliant." The room went silent. My mother smiled politely, then changed the subject. Jason rolled his eyes. But me? I felt like I was glowing from the inside. Someone had finally spoken the words I had longed to hear. That night, Daniel told me, "You deserve to be celebrated, Em. Not just tolerated." I never forgot that. Back in the present, I stopped at a crosswalk. A little girl tugged at her mother's hand, asking for ice cream. The mother bent down, kissed her forehead, and said, "Of course, sweetheart." The sight made my chest ache. That simple act of warmth, something I'd rarely received, looked so natural, so effortless. I whispered under my breath, why wasn't it like that for me? The cars rushed past, their tires hissing against the damp road, carrying me back into the flow of the city. When I returned to the hotel, a voicemail waited on my phone. Mom's voice sharp as ever, "Emily, this is getting out of hand. The neighbors are asking questions. You need to control this before it ruins our family's reputation." Reputation. That word again. It had always mattered more to her than love, than comfort, than me. I replayed the message, listening not just to the words but to the tone. There was no worry, no grief, only fear of judgment. For years I had believed their indifference was my fault. Maybe I wasn't lovable enough. Maybe I wasn't exceptional enough. But hearing her voice that day, I realized the truth. It was never about me. It was about them. Their inability to see beyond Jason, beyond appearances. I sat by the window watching the sun dip low, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. My pen scratched across the journal again. Today I remembered the cake without candles, the essay without applause, the acceptance letter without celebration. And now the burial without family. A pattern woven so tightly it became my second skin. But I'm peeling it off thread by thread. Their silence is no longer my cage. It is my weapon. I closed the journal. That evening, the local news ran the story again. This time they interviewed a veteran who had served with Daniel. He was a good man, the veteran said, his voice cracking. She shouldn't have had to come home alone. The camera panned to me briefly footage from the airport, a lone suitcase trailing, but this time they paired it with the soldier's words. Suddenly, my silence wasn't emptiness. It was evidence. It was the truth. And my family. They were nowhere to be seen. Later that night, Jason called again. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was tight, almost panicked. Emily, pick up. We need to talk. People think we abandoned you. This is not how it looks. I laughed quietly in the dark. Not how it looks. No, Jason. It was exactly how it looked. I whispered to the silence, and now the whole world sees. The rain began again outside, tapping the glass in a steady rhythm, like punctuation to my thoughts. The knock at the hotel door came just as I was tracing the last line of Daniel's handwriting with my finger. I had been staring at his letter for what felt like hours, letting the ink blur and sharpen again through the sting in my eyes. The sound startled me sharp against the hush of the room, and for a moment I thought it might be Jason or even my mother ready to scold me for letting the world see what they had done. My chest tightened, breath held, but when I opened the door it was Sergeant Miller. He looked older than I remembered from the funeral uniform, crisp, but eyes weary like a man carrying ghosts. He held his cap under his arm and said softly, "Ma'am, I thought you shouldn't be alone." Those words, so simple, hit harder than any headline. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat at the small desk with 2 cups of bitter hotel coffee between us. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, speaking in that measured tone soldiers use when they're trying to hide their grief. "Daniel used to talk about you," he said. "Said you were the only reason he could stand the long nights. He carried your letters in his vest." I looked down at my hands, twisting the ring that still clung to my finger. "He never told me that," I whispered. Miller shook his head. "He didn't have to. Everyone knew." Silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was thick, filled with the weight of Daniel's absence and the strange comfort of knowing I had been seen by him even when he didn't say it out loud. Then Miller reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. My heart stopped when I saw the handwriting, Daniel's scrawl unmistakable. "He asked me to give you this if—" Miller swallowed hard. "If he didn't make it back." My fingers trembled as I took it. For a moment I just stared, terrified to open it, because as long as it stayed sealed, part of me could pretend he was still here. Finally, I slid my finger under the flap. The paper inside was creased, smudged, but his words were clear. "M, if you're reading this, it means I didn't keep my promise to grow old with you. But I need you to keep yours to live. Do not let anyone make you small. You were never small. You were the bravest thing I ever knew." I pressed the letter to my chest, sobbing without sound. His voice echoed in my head, warm and steady, and for the first time since I'd landed, I felt something solid in me resolve. I looked up at Miller and said, "Do you know what my family texted me when I came home?" He shook his head. My voice was flat, controlled, but every word carried a blade. "Try Uber." That's what my brother wrote. And my mother asked why I didn't plan better. His jaw clenched. "They said that to you," I nodded, calm as stone, after burying him. The anger in his eyes flared, but I didn't need it. I sat in my silence, letting those words hang like smoke. Finally, he said, "Then maybe it's time the world saw the truth." He left soon after, leaving me alone with the echo of that sentence. I stood at the window, staring out at the city lights, each one blinking like a witness. That's when the seed planted itself. I wouldn't scream or beg. I would let their actions expose them, quietly, patiently, like Daniel had taught me. The next morning, the idea grew. I scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't seen in years: Rachel Turner. We had been friends in college, sharing dorm rooms and late-night pizza. She had gone on to become a journalist, the kind who still believed in stories that mattered. My thumb hovered over the call button before pressing. The phone rang twice. Emily, she said, surprise and warmth in her voice. Wow, it's been forever. I swallowed. Rachel, you saw the news. Of course. That photo seeing you walk alone at the airport broke me. Why wasn't anyone there? I paused, letting silence do its work. Then answered, maybe that's a story people need to hear. She went quiet. Are you saying you want to talk? I thought of Mom's voicemail about reputation, Jason's panicked calls. I thought of the cake without candles, the essay without applause, the burial without a ride. Yes, I said at last. But not for me. For Daniel. He deserved better. And maybe people should know why I walked through that airport alone. Rachel exhaled sharply. Emily, if you're ready, this could matter. My voice steadied. I'm ready. That night I lay awake. Daniel's letter folded neatly on the nightstand. Memories rose and fell like tides. I remembered the park bench where he had proposed with nothing more than a takeout box between us. Life's short, Em, he had said. Let's not waste it pretending we don't know what we want. He always made me feel chosen. Even now gone, he was still choosing me through Miller's knock, through that letter, through Rachel's voice offering me a platform. I closed my eyes and whispered, I hear you, Daniel. I won't let them make me small again. The following day, Rachel met me at a cafe near the river. She set her recorder on the table, but her eyes never left mine. Tell me everything you want them to know, she said. I breathed deep, the smell of roasted coffee filling my lungs, and began. I told her about the texts, the indifference, the childhood birthdays with candles, only for Jason, the essay, no one celebrated, the acceptance letter dismissed, and now the airport arrival without a hand to hold. She scribbled notes, but more than that, she listened with the kind of weight that made me feel like my words would not vanish this time. Emily, she said softly, this isn't just your story. It's a mirror. Families will see themselves in it. For the first time, I believed my silence breaking could help others too. When the article went live 2 days later, I expected a ripple. I didn't expect a flood. The headline read, Forgotten Widow, One Woman's Return from War's Edge Alone. Within hours, it was everywhere, shared on social media, reposted by veterans groups, and discussed on local radio. Strangers sent messages. We stand with you. You're not alone. I'm so sorry for your loss. Each one felt like a stitch mending something torn. Meanwhile, Jason's name flashed on my phone again and again. This time I let it go to voicemail. His voice was frantic, his mask of superiority cracked. Emily, take it down. Do you know what this is doing to us? I held the phone to my ear, listening to his panic, but my silence was deliberate. When he paused, I finally said low and steady, now the world sees what I always did. Then I ended the call. That evening, as twilight settled over the city, I sat at the hotel desk with Daniel's letter on one side and Rachel's article on the other. Side by side, his faith in me and the world's sudden recognition of my truth. Outside, the river shimmered under the moonlight. I opened the window and let the cool air rush in. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt steady, anchored in a way my family had never given me. I whispered into the night, this is just the beginning. And the night seemed to answer back with its silence, not empty this time, but full of memory of justice stirring, of a plan quietly taking root. The morning after the article exploded, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand. Messages from strangers, voicemails from Jason, a string of missed calls from Mom. I let them pile up. I didn't need to hear more excuses about family reputation. Instead, I opened the curtains and let the sunlight pour into the room. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, the light didn't feel like an intruder. It felt like a signal. I ordered a coffee downstairs, sat by the lobby window, and watched people rush by in the street. They carried briefcases, balanced phones against their shoulders, and herded kids into school buses. To them, it was an ordinary Wednesday. To me, it was the day after the world finally knew what my family was capable of. Yet beneath the relief, I felt a hum of unfinished business. It wasn't enough for people to just pity me. Daniel deserved more than a sympathy headline, and deep down I knew the real story wasn't just about being abandoned at an airport. It was about years of being erased. That thought stayed with me when my phone buzzed again, this time with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mrs. Carter," a woman's voice said. "This is Annette from the Veterans Support Group. I hope I'm not disturbing you." Her voice carried a warmth that immediately softened the edges of my fatigue. "No, not at all," I replied. "I wanted to reach out because, well, people are talking. They saw the article and they've been asking how they can help. Some want to organize a memorial here in Daniel's honor." My throat tightened. A memorial here in the very city where my family had failed me. "That's kind," I whispered. "And there's something else," Annette added. "I think you should know. Someone came to us a few days ago. A woman. She was asking about you, about Daniel. She wanted details." My chest froze. "Who?" "She didn't give her full name at first, but eventually said she was your mother." I closed my eyes. "Of course." Annette continued gently. "She asked if it was true you'd had trouble covering expenses. She wanted to know if we'd stepped in. It was almost like she was looking for proof to use against you." A bitter laugh slipped from my lips. "That sounds like her." Annette hesitated. "I don't mean to intrude, but if you'd like, I could connect you with others who've noticed things. Sometimes the truth comes out in whispers before it shows up in headlines." I thanked her, heart pounding. When I hung up, I stared at the coffee cooling in front of me. So Mom had been out there already trying to control the narrative, digging for angles to protect herself. It wasn't surprising, but it still sliced deep. I thought back to the voicemail she'd left me the night before. "You need to control this before it ruins our family's reputation." Maybe reputation was all she'd ever cared about. And maybe, just maybe, that obsession could be the very thread that unraveled her. Later that afternoon, I agreed to meet Annette at the community center downtown. She greeted me with a hug that was firm, not performative, and led me into a room filled with folding chairs and bulletin boards cluttered with flyers. She introduced me to a handful of veteran spouses who had come not just to express sympathy, but to share what they had seen and heard over the years. One woman, Mary, leaned in and whispered, "Your mother's been talking to the ladies at church. She's saying you exaggerated, that the press twisted your words. But people are starting to question her. Some remember how she never came to support events for Daniel. They're wondering if it was always like this." Another added, "We heard Jason at the country club last week trying to laugh it off. He told people you were dramatic, that you had a history of making things bigger than they were." Their words should have crushed me. Instead, I felt something sharp but clarifying. My family was scrambling, twisting, planting seeds of doubt. But in doing so, they were leaving a trail, and trails can be followed. That evening, Rachel called again. "Emily, the article's getting traction. People want a follow-up. Maybe we can dig deeper, tell the long version of what happened. Not just the airport, but the history." I hesitated. Exposing my family's patterns wasn't something I'd planned. For years, I had trained myself to keep their treatment hidden, to smile and move on. But Daniel's letter echoed in my mind. "Don't let anyone make you small." "Yes," I told her finally. "But if we do this, it has to be the truth. Not just my words. I want others to speak too, people who've seen." Rachel agreed. "I'll start making calls." That night, I sat at the hotel desk again, staring at Daniel's letter beside the glowing screen of my phone. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence as I wrote in his journal. "They're already trying to erase me even now. But I see the cracks forming. If they speak too much, they'll bury themselves. I closed the book, and for the first time in days, I smiled, not the brittle smile of someone faking strength, but the quiet curve of someone who had found a direction. The next day brought another unexpected twist. A voicemail from my aunt, my mother's younger sister, who rarely calls. Her voice trembled. Emily, I don't know how to say this, but I'm proud of you. I saw the news and I read the article. And I need you to know what you said, it's true. I saw it all. I remember birthdays when you were forgotten. I remember your mother brushing you aside. If you ever need me to speak, I will. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone pressed to my ear, stunned. For years, silence had been the family's shield. No one challenged Mom. No one contradicted Jason. But now even that was cracking. My aunt's voice felt like the first stone loosening from a wall that had held for decades. Later, when Jason tried again to call, I let it ring until it stopped. His voicemail came through. Emily, you don't understand. You're making us look bad. Do you even care what this is doing to me? His words, so centered on himself, only reinforced the truth. I didn't answer. My silence was louder than anything I could have said. That evening I walked by the river. The air was cool, carrying the smell of damp earth and faint traces of blossoms. I watched the current carry fallen leaves downstream, relentless, steady. I thought about how much of my life had been spent swimming against currents I didn't choose, fighting for scraps of love that should have been freely given. Not anymore. Now I would let their own current carry them where it must. I would simply make sure the world was watching. When I returned to the hotel, Rachel had sent me a draft of her follow-up piece. The headline read, "A Lifetime of Silence, How One Widow's Return Exposed More Than Just a Family's Absence." I read through the draft slowly, heart pounding as decades of my invisibility took shape in black and white. It was terrifying and liberating at once. This wasn't just my story anymore, it was evidence. As I set the laptop aside, thunder rumbled in the distance. A storm was moving, in the kind that rattled windows and cleared the air. I stood at the window watching dark clouds gather and whispered to Daniel's letter on the desk. "You told me not to let them make me small. I think I finally understand how." The storm broke with a flash of lightning, illuminating the room in stark white. I didn't flinch. For the first time I welcomed the noise, the chaos, because I knew it wasn't mine to bear anymore. It was theirs. And as the rain began to lash against the glass, I realized something: the plan wasn't about fighting louder. It was about letting their whispers betray them one by one, until the silence they had forced on me became the echo that undid them. I was halfway through folding Daniel's letter back into its envelope when the knock came again. For a moment, I thought it was housekeeping, but the rhythm was deliberate, too hesitant to be a stranger's. I opened the door and froze. Standing there was Aunt Caroline, my mother's younger sister, the one who had left town years ago, who never called except on holidays, whose voice had cracked with something unspoken in that voicemail I'd listened to 2 nights before. She looked older than I remembered, hair threaded with gray lines deep around her mouth, but her eyes were clear, searching mine. "Emily," she said, almost like an apology. "I had to see you." I stepped aside silently. She walked in, setting her purse carefully on the chair as though laying down a burden. For a long moment we just stood there, the hum of the air conditioner filling the space between us. Then she said, "I read the articles. I saw the footage. And I remembered too much to stay quiet." I sat on the edge of the bed waiting. Caroline's hands twisted together. "Your mother will never admit it, but I saw it all. The birthdays where your name was missing, the college letter she folded and put away without mentioning at dinner, the way she called you the practical one, like it was a consolation prize. I told myself it wasn't my place, but watching you walk through that airport alone..." Her voice broke. It felt like watching history repeat itself, only louder. I closed my eyes. Her words were both balm and blade. To hear someone else name the things I had carried alone was a relief so sharp it hurt. When I opened them again, I asked quietly, "Why now?" Caroline's eyes filled. "Because I was a coward before. But maybe I can help you now if you'll let me." The pacing of my heart shifted slow, then quick. For years, silence had been my only company in that family. And now, here was someone offering not just sympathy, but allegiance. I didn't trust it fully, not yet, but I felt the soil of my plan turning fertile with possibility. I don't need revenge, I said carefully. I need the truth to hold. Solid, undeniable. Caroline nodded. Then you'll need proof. Not just stories, documents, records, the things your mother and Jason don't think anyone notices. Her words made the air in the room crackle. I thought of Daniel's journal, Rachel's articles, the whispers from the veterans' wives. They were pieces of a puzzle, but without something concrete, my family could still wave them away as exaggeration. What kind of proof? I asked. Caroline reached into her purse. She pulled out an envelope thicker than Daniel's letter, worn at the edges. She placed it between us. I kept things, she said simply. I slid the papers out carefully. Photocopies of checks Daniel had sent when my parents claimed they were struggling. Letters he'd written to Mom offering help ignored. Even a note from years ago in my mother's handwriting, dismissing me in words so stark they made my stomach twist. Jason is our pride. Emily will be fine. She doesn't need as much. My hands trembled, not from grief, but from the weight of something solid, undeniable. I looked up at Caroline, my voice low. Why did you keep these? She sighed. Because I always knew someday you'd need to remember it wasn't in your head. That it happened. Silence fell again, heavy, but not suffocating this time. It felt like the foundation was being laid. Finally, I said, then help me build it. Her eyes softened. I will. Later that afternoon, I called Rachel. She answered on the first ring. I have something, I told her. What kind of something? Documents. From my aunt. Proof my family's neglect wasn't just in moments, it was patterned, deliberate. There was a pause, then the sound of her breath quickening. Emily. That changes everything. If you're willing, we can move this beyond a human interest story. This could be accountability. I hesitated. My pulse thrummed. Accountability. The word felt heavier than revenge, sharper than pity. It was what Daniel would have wanted, not spectacle, but truth. Let's do it, I said. That night, I and Caroline spread the papers across the hotel desk. Receipts, letters, checks, notes. She explained each one like she was unspooling years of silence. This one, she pointed, is when Daniel sent money for your parents' house repairs. Jason told everyone he paid for it. Your mother let him. I touched the photocopy, my jaw tight. This, she lifted another, is when you won that essay prize. Your mother cut out the article, but not to keep it. She crumpled it and tossed it. I took it out of the trash. I blinked hard. You kept it. Caroline nodded. Because I couldn't stand the thought of you thinking it never happened. Each piece was a twist of the knife, but also a stitch sewing together a fabric I could finally hold up to the light. At one point, Caroline looked at me and whispered, Emily, do you realize what this means? They can't bury this anymore. If you use it, they'll have nowhere to hide. I leaned back, staring at the pile. My silence had always been their shield. Now, with these papers, silence could become my blade. I thought of Jason's last voicemail, his voice cracking with panic. You're making us look bad. He had no idea how much worse it could get when truth wasn't just spoken, but documented. The next morning, Rachel met us at the cafe again. I slid the envelope across the table. She opened it carefully, scanning each page, her expression shifting from disbelief to grim understanding. This is, Emily, this is huge. It's not just your word anymore. It's theirs in their handwriting. Caroline sat beside me, her hand resting lightly on mine. For once, I didn't pull away. Rachel closed the folder and looked at me seriously. If we go forward with this, there's no turning back. Your family will fight. They'll deny. They might even try to attack your character. I felt Daniel's letter in my purse, his words thrumming through me. Don't let anyone make you small. I've been small my whole life, I said quietly. Not anymore. That evening back at the hotel, I sat alone after Caroline left. The papers were neatly stacked on the desk, the storm outside tapping against the window again. I picked up my pen and wrote in Daniel's journal. Today I held proof in my hands. Not just memory, not just pain. Proof. And with it, I hold a choice: stay silent and let them rewrite me again, or speak and let the silence finally break them. I closed the book, slid the envelope beneath it, like a foundation under a house, and whispered into the hum of the air conditioner. We're building something, Daniel. Brick by brick. For the first time, the silence around me didn't feel like a void. It felt like scaffolding holding up something stronger than I had ever allowed myself to imagine. And as the city lights blinked outside, I realized I was no longer the girl waiting for candles on someone else's cake. I was the woman holding the matches. The envelope of documents lay heavy on the desk that night, as if it carried not only paper but decades of dust finally disturbed. I barely slept, my mind spinning with images of my mother's face, if she ever saw her own words printed in black and white for the world to read. At dawn, when the first light slanted through the curtains, I made a decision. It was time to put these ghosts into the hands of someone who could turn them into weapons. By mid-morning, I found myself standing outside a modest brick building downtown with Caroline by my side. The brass plate on the door read, "Whitaker and Cole, Attorneys at Law." I had called ahead, explained just enough for them to agree to meet. My palms were damp against Daniel's journal clutched under my arm, the envelope tucked safely inside. Inside, the office smelled faintly of old books and polished wood. A receptionist ushered us to a waiting room where the tick of a grandfather clock filled the silence. After a few minutes, a tall woman with silver hair appeared. She extended her hand firmly. "Ms. Carter, I'm Margaret Whitaker. Please come in." Her office was lined with shelves sagging under the weight of law books. I sat across from her desk, Caroline beside me, while Margaret adjusted her glasses and folded her hands. "Tell me what brings you here." For a moment I faltered. Years of swallowing my voice made it strange to lay out the story. But then I remembered Daniel's letter, his words etched into me. "Don't let anyone make you small." So I told her everything. The texts at the airport, the years of neglect, the way my family was already spinning lies to protect their image. Finally, I slid the envelope across the desk. "And this," I said quietly, "is proof." Margaret opened it, flipping through the photocopies slowly, her eyes sharpening with each page. "Checks, letters, notes in your mother's handwriting." She looked up at me. "Ms. Carter, this isn't just painful history. This is evidence. If they attempt to defame you or interfere with Daniel's legacy, these documents give you leverage." The word echoed inside me: leverage. I had never held that in my family before. Caroline spoke for the first time, her voice steady. She doesn't want revenge. She wants to protect herself and Daniel's memory from being erased again. Margaret nodded. "Understood. We can prepare a file, quiet for now. But if they push, we'll be ready." I exhaled slowly, feeling something uncoil in my chest. For the first time, silence wasn't just survival, it was a strategy. That afternoon, back at the hotel, Caroline left to run errands while I stayed behind. Alone, I opened Daniel's journal and wrote, "Today I sat across from the law." For years, I thought justice was a word too big for me, but now it feels like a shield I never knew I could carry. The pen scratched softly, the only sound besides the hum of the air conditioner. I closed the journal and pressed my hand over it like sealing a promise. Just then, my phone buzzed with another voicemail notification. Against my better judgment, I listened. It was my mother. Her tone was sharp, brittle, the way glass sounds before it breaks. "Emily, we need to talk. These stories, these articles, you're humiliating us. Do you understand what people are saying about our family? About me? Call me back immediately." I stared at the phone, lips curling into something between a laugh and a sigh. Even now, she said nothing about Daniel, nothing about me, only about herself. I didn't call back. Instead, I pressed delete and let the silence answer for me. 2 days later, Rachel called with urgency in her voice. Emily, things are moving faster than I expected. Veterans groups are asking if they can speak on your behalf. And I heard your brother was overheard at the club again trying to discredit you. But people are pushing back. They're asking where he was when you landed at the airport. I let her words settle. Then I said, Rachel, I need you to hold off for now. I have something stronger coming. What is it? Proof, I replied. And protection. That evening, Caroline returned carrying an old shoebox. She set it down on the desk and looked at me with a strange mixture of guilt and determination. I thought you should have this. I kept it for years. Inside were photographs me as a child, always at the edge of the frame while Jason took center stage. School awards, my name barely legible in the captions while my brother's trophies filled shelves. Even letters I had written as a teenager asking for my parents' approval were never answered. Each photo was another piece of the puzzle. Each one is a quiet indictment. I picked up one picture of my 12th birthday, Jason blowing out candles, Mom's hand on his shoulder. I was in the background clapping. I remembered that night, remembered the ache in my chest, but seeing it frozen on glossy paper brought it back with brutal clarity. Caroline touched my arm gently. They can't hide behind their reputation anymore, Emily. Not with this. I nodded, though my throat felt tight. Then we'll use it. Carefully. The following morning, Margaret called. Ms. Carter, I've reviewed the documents. We'll prepare a protective file in case your family attempts to defame you further. But I'll be honest, this evidence is strong enough to bring to court if it comes to that. Her calm tone steadied me. Thank you, I whispered. Until then, she added, say as little as possible. Sometimes silence is your sharpest weapon. I smiled faintly at the words. Daniel had said almost the same. Later that day, I walked by the river again. The water shimmered under the sun, carrying fragments of leaves downstream. I thought of how long I had carried fragments of myself broken by years of neglect. Now slowly they were coming together into something whole. As I leaned on the railing, my phone buzzed with a text from Jason. Just 5 words. You'll regret this, Emily. I stared at the screen, my reflection faint against the glass. For years those words might have made me crumble. But now, armed with truth, they only made me steady. I typed back nothing. Silence again, the sharpest answer. That evening, Caroline and I sat together sipping tea in the dim hotel light. She looked at me and said, Do you know what I admire most about you, Emily? You never screamed, you never begged, you just kept walking, and now the world sees you. Her words sank deep, both comfort and challenge. Because it was true, I had survived by swallowing my cries. But now survival wasn't enough. It was time to live, to fight, even if my fight was quiet. I set down my cup, folded Daniel's letter open once more, and whispered, I'm ready. Outside, the city pulsed with light and sound. Inside, silence wrapped around me like armor. The papers, the photos, the letters, they were my shield. And Margaret, Rachel, and Caroline, my unexpected allies, were the walls holding me up. For the first time in my life, I wasn't alone in the shadows. And as I closed the curtains against the night, I knew the storm was far from over. But now, finally, I was prepared. I never believed silence could roar until I watched it echo back through other people's mouths. The morning the follow-up article ran, the one Rachel and I had pieced together with Caroline's documents, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing like a hive. Headlines glowed on the screen. Forgotten widow, a lifetime of being erased. The article didn't just tell my story, it showed it. Photocopies of notes in my mother's handwriting, photographs of birthdays where I stood clapping in the background while Jason blew out candles, snippets of letters I had written that went unanswered. By noon, the article had spread beyond our city. Strangers sent messages not just of sympathy but of outrage. Veterans organizations demanded statements. Churches that once praised my mother for her charity work now questioned her absence in mine. The silence I had carried for years was suddenly a mirror, and the reflection wasn't kind to them. Jason called again and again. I didn't answer. His voicemails shifted tone by the hour. First angry, then pleading, then panicked. You have to stop this, Emily. Do you want to destroy us? Do you want to ruin Mom? Each message felt like proof that my silence was working. They weren't worried about me, about Daniel. They were worried about themselves. That afternoon, Rachel called. Her voice buzzed with energy. Emily, it's everywhere. People are demanding interviews. National outlets, not just local. They want to hear your voice. I sat by the window watching a storm gather in the distance, clouds bruising the horizon. I'm not sure, I said slowly. I don't want to be a spectacle. You wouldn't be, she insisted. You'd be true. And Emily? She paused. Your family is already scrambling. If you stay quiet now, they'll try to rewrite the narrative again. But if you speak even once, they can't. Her words rippled through me. I thought of Daniel's letter. Don't let anyone make you small. Maybe this was how, not through shouting, but through one clear, undeniable strike. I'll do one interview, I said finally. But only one. And it's not about them, it's about Daniel, about what silence costs. Rachel exhaled, relief and determination blending. I'll set it up. The interview was filmed in a quiet studio 2 days later. No bright stage lights, no dramatic music. Just me in a chair, Daniel's folded flag on the table beside me. The journalist asked gentle questions, but I spoke with clarity I didn't know I had. I told them about walking through the airport alone, about the years of invisibility, about Daniel's unwavering belief in me. I held up his letter, my voice steady as I read his words. You were never small. You were the bravest thing I ever knew. When the segment aired, people wrote not just to say they were moved, but to say they were changed. Women told me they recognized themselves in my silence. Men admitted they saw their mothers, their wives, their sisters in my story. What had once been my private shame became something larger, something that belonged to others too. But not everyone reacted with compassion. The night after the interview aired, I received a message from a number I didn't recognize. It read, "You've gone too far. Family is blood. Blood doesn't betray blood." I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I deleted them. Threats were just fear dressed up as anger. 2 days later, I was in the hotel lobby when I saw Jason. He hadn't called ahead, hadn't texted. He just appeared pacing near the front desk, his tie-loosened eyes darting. When he spotted me, he hurried over. Emily, we need to talk. I stood still, the weight of Daniel's letter in my purse grounding me. About what? About this circus. His voice cracked. The articles, the interview. Do you even realize what you're doing to Mom? To me? I met his gaze calm. I realized a long time ago what you all did to me. Now everyone else sees it too. His jaw tightened. You think strangers matter more than your own family. I tilted my head. What kind of family lets their daughter walk alone after burying her husband? He opened his mouth, then shut it, words collapsing under the truth. For a moment I almost pitied him. Almost. I'm giving you one chance, he said finally, his voice low. Pull back. End it. Or else. Or else what, I asked softly. He had no answer. He turned on his heel and stormed out, leaving the echo of his threat hanging in the air. That night, Caroline and I sat in the room together. She looked at me over her teacup. That was your first strike, she said. I frowned. I didn't say anything to him. I just told the truth. She shook her head. Exactly. You didn't shout, you didn't chase him. You let the truth corner him. That's the first strike, they'll feel it more than anything else. Her words sank deep. I remembered Margaret's warning, sometimes silence is your sharpest weapon. Now I understand. The next morning I woke to a flurry of texts again. This time from old neighbors, old friends. Some apologized for not noticing sooner. Some admitted they had seen glimpses, whispers, but had been too polite to say anything. One message stopped me cold. Emily, I remember when your mom told me Jason deserved everything because he was the firstborn. I'm sorry I didn't speak then. Proof again, not in documents this time, but in memory corroborated by others. The cracks in my family's facade widened with every passing day. By afternoon, Rachel called with another update. Your stories sparked a debate in town. People are calling into radio shows writing letters to the editor. They're not just talking about you anymore. They're talking about favoritism, about what silence does to families. It's bigger than us now. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the river flow steadily and relentlessly. Bigger than us. That was the point. This was no longer just my burden. It was a mirror for anyone who had ever been erased. That evening, Jason left another voicemail. His tone was desperate now. Emily, you don't understand. You're tearing us apart. Mom can't show her face at church. People are asking questions I can't answer. Please, just stop. I sat on the edge of the bed listening. When the message ended, I whispered to the empty room, I'm not tearing us apart. I'm just not holding it together anymore. Later, Caroline joined me at the desk. She placed another folder beside the envelope from before. I found more, she said. Copies of emails Jason sent about Daniel's service money. He tried to take credit for things Daniel covered. My stomach tightened. Why? Because your mother let him, Caroline replied quietly. She wanted him to shine. Always him. I flipped through the emails, each one another nail in a coffin they were building themselves. Caroline looked at me, her voice steady. Emily, they're unraveling. You don't even have to push. Just keep standing still. I nodded, though inside I felt the swell of something more than resolve. It was the sense of momentum of a wave building. Outside, thunder rumbled again. The storm was close now. Before I went to bed, I opened Daniel's journal once more. My handwriting scrawled across the page. The first strike wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the silence of proof, the calm of truth, the weight of voices joining mine. They're cornered now, not by anger but by reflection. And reflection is harder to escape than any cage. I closed the book, laid his letter on top, and whispered into the quiet, We're getting closer. The storm outside cracked open the night sky, rain lashing against the glass. I didn't flinch. I welcomed it, because I knew this was only the beginning. The storm didn't end that night. Rain kept falling long after I turned off the lights, a steady drumming that matched the rhythm of my heart. By morning, the clouds had thinned, but the street still shone slick with the memory of it. I stood by the window, sipping bitter coffee from a paper cup, when my phone buzzed again. By now, the sound no longer startled me. Messages had become the background noise of my days. But this one made me pause. It wasn't from Jason, not from Mom, not from Rachel or Margaret. The name glowing on the screen read Lily Carter, Jason's daughter, my niece. I hadn't heard from her in months, maybe years. She was 19 now, in college, tall and sharp-eyed like her mother, but with a quiet streak I'd always recognized in her. When she was younger, she used to trail after me at family gatherings, asking questions no one else cared to answer: what books I was reading, what places I dreamed of seeing, what Daniel was like when we were dating. She saw me in a way her father never did. Her message was short. Aunt Emily, can we meet? Please, I need to talk to you. For a long moment, I just stared at the words, the weight of them pressing against years of silence. Then I typed back, Yes, tell me when. We met that evening at a small diner off the highway, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. Lily slid into the seat across from me, her hair damp from the drizzle outside. Her hands wrapped around a glass of water. She looked nervous, but her eyes, those Carter eyes, were steady. Aunt Emily, she began, her voice low. I saw the interview, and I read everything. I don't know what to believe anymore. I folded my hands, letting the silence stretch before answering. What do you feel? She blinked. What do you mean, forget belief? Forget what your dad or your grandma told you. When you saw me at that airport, when you heard my story, what did you feel? Her throat worked as she swallowed. I felt ashamed, because I remembered. Remembered what? She looked down at her hands. All the times they ignored you. The way Grandpa praised Dad for every little thing but never you. The way Grandma told me once, "Don't end up like your Aunt Emily, she settles too easily." I didn't understand then, but now, her voice cracked. Now I think she meant it as a warning, like being you was a failure. I sat still, letting her words fill the space. Lily's eyes shone with unshed tears. "But you're the only one who ever listened to me. You told me I was smart when everyone else just said I was pretty. You gave me that book of poems when I was 12. I still have it." A lump rose in my throat, unexpected and sharp. "You kept it." She nodded. "And when I saw you alone on the news, I realized they lied. All these years they lied about who mattered. They always made me believe Dad was the strong one. But he wasn't there for you. You were there for me. And I can't unsee that now." The pacing of the conversation shifted, slow, tentative, then quick, urgent. She leaned forward, voice dropping. "Dad's furious. He says you're destroying the family. But I don't think you are. I think you're just telling the truth. And I need you to know. I believe you. I'm on your side." Her words struck like lightning, not loud but blinding. I reached across the table, my hand brushing hers. "That's brave, Lily. Braver than I was at your age." She shook her head. "No, Aunt Emily. You were always brave. You just didn't know it." Silence settled, heavy but warm. The jukebox clicked, though it played nothing. Outside, headlights swept across the rain-slick pavement. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight in my chest ease. When I returned to the hotel that night, Caroline was waiting in the lobby. She saw my expression and raised an eyebrow. "Something happened." I nodded, lowering my voice as we stepped into the elevator. Lily reached out. "She believes me. She wants to stand with me." Caroline's eyes widened. "Jason's daughter?" "Yes." In the quiet hum of the elevator, Caroline whispered, "That changes everything. If she speaks, they can't bury this as bitterness or exaggeration. She's blood, their blood, and she's the next generation." I exhaled, pressing my back against the mirrored wall. "Exactly." The next day, Rachel called with news. "Emily, your story's being debated on national talk shows now. People are split. Some call you courageous. Others say family business should stay private. But if someone else in the family came forward, someone credible—" I interrupted softly. "What if it was my niece?" Rachel was silent for a beat. Then, incredulous, "She'd speak." "She wants to," I said. "She's seen too much." Rachel's voice sharpened. "Emily, if Lily speaks publicly, it will destroy Jason's image. Are you ready for that fallout?" I closed my eyes, remembering Daniel's letter, remembering Lily's trembling hands across the diner table. "He destroyed himself long ago. I'm just done cleaning up after him." 2 nights later, Lily came to the hotel. Caroline brewed tea while Lily and I sat with Rachel, who had brought her recorder. The air was tense, but Lily's voice didn't waver as she recounted the moments that had stuck in her mind: birthdays, dinners, whispered comments from her grandmother. "They made Aunt Emily invisible," she said, her voice firm. "But she wasn't. I saw her. And now everyone should." Rachel looked at me, eyes wide with recognition. "This is it, Emily. This is the crack that becomes a break." The article with Lily's testimony went live the next morning. The headline, "Niece of Forgotten Widow Speaks She Was Invisible, But I Saw Her." The reaction was immediate. Strangers flooded the comments with support. Talk shows debated not just my story, but the generational cycle of favoritism. And Jason, he erupted. By noon, he had left me 3 more voicemails, his voice raw with rage. "How dare you drag my daughter into this? You manipulated her, Emily. She doesn't know what she's saying." But Lily did know. She had spoken with clarity, with courage. And for once, someone in that family besides me had chosen truth over silence. That evening, I walked alone by the river, the city lights rippling across the dark water. My phone buzzed again, this time a text from Lily. I don't regret it. I feel lighter. Thank you for letting me speak. I typed back, no, Lily, thank you. You broke the silence, I couldn't. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, the cool night air brushing against my face. The river moved steadily, unstoppable, and for the first time I realized I was part of something larger than myself, a current that no storm, no family denial could hold back. When I returned to the hotel, Caroline was waiting in the lobby again. She smiled faintly. That was the second strike, she said. I smiled back, weary but steady. Yes. And it wasn't mine. It was hers. Together we rode the elevator up, the silence between us no longer heavy, but alive with possibility. The summons came on a Tuesday morning, tucked in a plain envelope, and slid under the door of my hotel room. I bent to pick it up, heart already knowing before my eyes confirmed. My family had finally acted. Inside was a notice my mother and Jason were filing a defamation suit against me. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. After years of silence, after lifetimes of pretending nothing was wrong, they wanted to drag me into a courtroom for daring to speak the truth. I called Margaret, my attorney, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. She listened without surprise. I thought this might happen, she said. It's a classic tactic. They're panicking. They want to intimidate you into silence. And if I don't back down, her voice was calm steel beneath velvet, then we'll fight. And Emily, you have more than truth. You have evidence. I looked at Daniel's letter on the desk, then at the stack of documents Caroline had given me. For the first time, the word courtroom didn't terrify me. It felt inevitable, like a road I had been walking for years without realizing. The hearing was set for 3 weeks later. During that time, the world didn't slow down. Articles kept spreading, interviews replayed, Lily's words still echoing across news feeds. Jason stopped calling, but his silence was louder than his rage. I knew he was preparing, so was I. Caroline stayed by my side, helping me sift through papers late into the night. Sometimes she would pause, staring at an old photograph or note, and whisper, I should have spoken sooner. I always answered the same, you're speaking now, that's what matters. Rachel visited often, her notebook filling with observations, her eyes burning with quiet conviction. She told me she'd sit in the gallery when the day came, not as a journalist, but as a witness. And Lily, dear brave Lily, called me every evening. Sometimes we talked about the case, sometimes about nothing at all, her classes, her friends, a poem she'd written. She reminded me there was life beyond this storm, and for that, I loved her more than words could say. The morning of the trial, I dressed in a simple navy blazer, the same one I had worn to Daniel's funeral. Not out of sentiment, but out of calculation. People underestimated a woman in the Navy. They thought her quiet, cautious, reasonable. That was fine with me. Let them underestimate. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, their cameras clicking like cicadas. I walked through them steadily, Daniel's folded flag tucked in my bag, his letter close to my heart. Inside, the air was cool and stale, smelling faintly of varnish and paper. When I entered the courtroom, my eyes found them immediately. My mother, rigid in a cream suit, her face carefully arranged into pained dignity. Jason beside her, jaw tight, eyes flicking nervously toward the benches. They looked smaller than I remembered, as though the glare of truth had shrunk them. I sat at the defendant's table, Margaret at my side. She leaned toward me and whispered, Remember, we don't need to shout. We just need to show. I nodded, steadying my breath. The proceedings began. Their attorney painted me as bitter, as attention-seeking, as someone who twisted ordinary family struggles into public humiliation. He spoke of reputation, of legacy, of wounds inflicted by my words. When it was Margaret's turn, she rose calmly, her voice cutting through the room like glass. The question here is not whether Emily Carter spoke. It is whether she lied. And she did not. We will show you the proof. Their own words, their handwriting. One by one, she introduced the documents, the note where my mother dismissed me, the checks Daniel had sent, the photos Caroline had saved. Each piece landed like a quiet hammer. I watched my mother's face tighten, Jason's hands twitch. Then Margaret called Caroline to the stand. My aunt walked with measured steps, her voice steady as she confirmed the truth of what she had seen, what she had kept hidden for years. At one point, she glanced at me, her eyes brimming, and said, "I stayed silent too long." But silence is what hurt Emily most. "I won't be silent anymore." Her words filled the room heavier than any accusation. The twist came when Lily took the stand. Jason stiffened visibly, his eyes widening as his daughter walked past him to the witness chair. She spoke softly but firmly, recounting what she had witnessed growing up: the favoritism, the dismissive comments, the way her aunt was always pushed aside. "I saw her," Lily said, her voice clear as glass, "even when they didn't. And I believe her." Jason's face drained of color. For once, he didn't try to interrupt. When she stepped down, she brushed my hand as she passed. That small touch was more powerful than any headline. By the time it was my turn to speak, the air in the courtroom felt different, charged heavy with the weight of what had already been laid bare. I rose slowly, walked to the witness chair, and swore the oath. The attorney asked Ms. Carter, "Why did you go public with your story?" I thought of Daniel's letter, of the airport, of the years of invisibility. Then I answered, my voice steady, because silence was killing me. And because my husband deserved to be remembered for the love he gave, not erased by the family that abandoned me. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth to stand. The words hung in the air. No one spoke. Even the judge seemed to pause before nodding for the next question. The trial lasted only 2 days. By the end, the evidence was undeniable. The judge dismissed their claims, ruling that I had not defamed them. On the contrary, the documents proved the truth of my words. The suit they had filed to silence me had become the stage where their neglect was exposed. When the verdict was read, my mother sat, frozen lips pressed thin. Jason stared at the floor, shoulders slumped. For once, neither had anything to say. I walked out of the courtroom into the bright afternoon sun. Reporters shouted questions, microphones thrust forward, but I kept walking, Daniel's letter pressed against my chest. Beside me, Caroline exhaled a long, trembling breath. "It's over," she whispered. "No," I corrected softly. "It's begun." That night, back at the hotel, I opened Daniel's journal once more. My handwriting flowed steadily across the page. Today they tried to break me with the law, but the law became my shield. Their silence crumbled into evidence. Their reputation collapsed under its weight. For once, I walked out not invisible but seen. "And Daniel, I think you'd be proud." I closed the journal, placed his letter on top, and sat by the window watching the city glow. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, their sound carried on the wind. It felt like absolution, but also like a warning. Because battles don't always end in courtrooms. Some continue in whispers and cold shoulders in the spaces between family gatherings. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had stood in the brightest light, faced the sharpest eyes, and I had not disappeared. As night fell, I whispered into the quiet, "We won, Daniel." Not because they lost, but because I finally stood. The silence that followed was not empty. It was whole, complete, filled with the weight of judgment and the freedom of release. And for the first time in my life, silence belonged to me. The morning after the verdict, I woke to a stillness I hadn't felt in years. No frantic buzzing of my phone, no weight of anticipation pressing against my chest. Just silence. But this time, it wasn't the silence of erasure. It was the silence of release. I sat by the window of the hotel, watching sunlight stretch across the rooftops, and realized the storm had passed. I brewed a cup of coffee in the small machine by the desk, the bitter scent filling the room. When I opened Daniel's journal, the page that greeted me was one I hadn't touched in weeks. His last entry, written before his final deployment. His words uneven but steady. "If anything happens, Em, I want you to live without apology. Don't wait for permission to exist." I traced the letters with my fingertip, the ink faint from age, and whispered, "I hear you now." Later that day, I walked out of the hotel lobby for the last time. Caroline was waiting by the curb, her car engine humming softly. "Where to?" she asked. "Home," I said. Then I corrected myself. "Not theirs. Mine." She smiled, understanding. Back at the old house I had once shared with Daniel, the air smelled of dust and memory. I opened the windows wide, letting the light flood in, carrying away the shadows. The rooms echoed, but they no longer felt empty. They felt expectant, like a stage waiting for a play to begin. Neighbors stopped by over the next few days, some with flowers, some with food. They apologized for not seeing, for not asking questions sooner. I accepted their words, but I didn't carry their guilt. That weight was no longer mine. Jason tried once more to call. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was tired, cracked and defeated. "Emily, I don't know what to say. Mom barely leaves the house. People look at us differently now. Maybe you're happy about that. Maybe you got what you wanted." I listened to the message in the kitchen, leaning against the counter. Then I deleted it. Not out of anger, not even out of satisfaction, just clarity. I didn't need to respond. The story had already answered for me. One evening, Lily came by. She sat at the dining table, the same one where I had once been ignored, and spread her books out to study. I made us tea, and for a while we didn't talk about the trial or family or even Daniel. We just talked about her classes, her plans, and the poems she was writing. At one point she looked up and said softly, "It feels different here, lighter." "It is," I said. She smiled. "I'm glad you didn't stay silent." So was I. The twist came a week later when a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting was my mother's. I held the envelope in my hand for a long time before opening it. Inside, just a single page. Her words were brief, clipped, but one line stood out. "Maybe I was wrong about you." No apology, no admission of guilt. But for her, it was more than I had ever expected. I folded the letter and placed it in Daniel's journal, not as validation, but as a record that even those who tried hardest to erase me had been forced to acknowledge I existed. I didn't reply. Some silences are endings. That weekend I stood at the Veterans Memorial downtown, the folded flag cradled in my hands. A small crowd had gathered, friends, neighbors, members of the support group. Caroline stood beside me, Rachel a few steps away, Lily in the front row. The ceremony was simple. No speeches, no grandeur, just names read aloud, and Daniel's among them. When they called his name, I stepped forward and placed the flag at the base of the memorial. The stone was cool beneath my fingers, the engraving deep and permanent. For years I had carried the weight of invisibility, but here his name and mine both existed where no one could erase them. As I stepped back, I felt the weight lift, not gone, but transformed. That night, I wrote my final entry in Daniel's journal. This began with silence. A silence that buried me, that made me small, that taught me to swallow myself. But silence became my weapon, my shield, my voice. It broke them before it broke me. And now I begin again. Not invisible, not erased, seen. I closed the journal for the last time and placed it on the shelf by the window, the moonlight casting a silver glow across its cover. Outside, the city hummed with ordinary life, cars, laughter, and the faint strains of music drifting from a distant bar. For once, the world felt like it was moving with me, not against me. I poured myself a glass of wine, lifted it to the air, and whispered, "To Daniel. To silence. To beginnings." The glass clinked softly against the rim of the window. I didn't win by shouting. I didn't win by fighting louder. I won by standing still, by letting their cracks show, by refusing to vanish. And maybe that was the greatest revenge of all, not destroying them, but living so fully that their erasure no longer had power. As dawn broke the next morning, I stepped outside into the cool air, a small bag packed at my feet. Caroline pulled up, rolling down the window. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. "Ready." We drove past the places that once haunted me: the church, the old house, the streets where I used to walk unseen. Each one blurred behind me, fading into memory. Ahead, the horizon glowed with a new light, and I felt Daniel's words rise inside me again. Don't let anyone make you small. I smiled, not bitter, not broken, but whole. And as the road opened wide before me, I whispered into the wind, I'm not small, not anymore. The silence that answered was full, not empty, not hollow, but brimming with promise. It was no longer the silence of being erased. It was the silence of the beginning. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the left.